Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the ShopNotes podcast. I'm your host, Phil, and I'm joined today by Logan. It's vacation season, people, and not everyone is here all the time. It's episode number 75. Thanks for sticking with us, and I hope you enjoy the show.
This episode of the ShopNotes podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Magazine. Woodsmith Magazine has been the trusted source for all your woodworking information for over 40 years. From tips and techniques to furniture projects to shop projects, you'll find it all at Woodsmith Magazine. Subscribe today at woodsmith.com.
So now, one thing that I heard, or you made a comment the other day that I thought was kind of interesting, is one of the problems that woodworkers, home hobbyist woodworkers have is what to do with scraps. Like, what's too small to keep?
Yeah.
What's worth saving? But then I realized that for some folk, like this season is camping season, which is Latin for scrap management.
That's right. Yeah. And I'll tell you, having been camping a lot in the last couple weeks with my boys and my wife and stuff, shop scrap burns really nicely.
Doesn't it?
Really hot and really fast usually.
It's pretty awesome. I end up, my sister has a fireplace up at her house. So whenever we go back to Wisconsin to visit, I usually end up bringing a little box or crate along that has a bunch of shop scraps in it. And it is kind of funny, you know, because she'll get firewood from whatever. It gets dropped off, and who knows how wet it is and what exactly. I mean, it says that it's hardwood, but I mean, it could just be a bunch of popple, you know, that's just...
Yep. Yeah, well, see, and one of my things, and I've said this before on the podcast, is that I hate clutter. So, I think like every woodworker, I usually tend to hoard scraps, and that's one of the things that starts cluttering up my shop the most. Some of them don't actually live in my shop. Some of it ends up cluttering my garage, because I kind of have some lumber storage in my garage and stuff. But this last trip, I was like, oh, crap. You know, all my firewood, I have a lot of firewood at my house that's been cut and split for 4 years now. It's starting to get soft, so it doesn't burn really well. So it's like, to get a full weekend of camping out of it, I have to fill up my 8-foot box full of wood. Because it's like, you know, every time the boys are like, hey, can we throw a lock on the fire? It's like, no, throw 4 on, because it's like styrofoam, right? But I went through and cleaned out most of my scrap over the last couple of camping trips. But with that being said, I think the type of scrap you hold on to, or offcuts, let's call it offcuts, it sounds cleaner. The type of offcuts that you hold on to really depends on, I think, what you do project-wise or woodworking-wise, right?
Sure.
A great example, this issue of popular woodworking, I'm working on a toolbox. And yesterday, I went all over our shop here looking for 8-inch plywood. Like, I could not find any. I need like a 6x7-inch piece. I needed a little piece. And I'm like, who purged all of our freaking scrap? Like, come on, there has to be some. So I finally found like a full sheet of it, like shoved in the rack in the back. But it's those instances that make me thankful that I'm a semi-hoarder. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I try not to be. So
I think the hardest part is when you're about to throw something on a fire like that, because I've done that too, where I'll just bring wood along, like if we go to up to one of the county parks and go for a picnic or something like that, and you're going to grill hot dogs and brats or something, and you go to throw something on the fire and it's actually like a work piece, you know, because there's one thing when it's a scrap and it's just
rough,
you know, it's just a misshapen block, you know, it looks like kids' blocks essentially, except they're grown-up woodworker blocks. But it's another thing if it's a shaped part from something, you know, and it's like, don't look it in the eyes.
Well, it's funny because we did it, well, not we. Chris Fitch did a big scrap purge it was over winter. And in particular, he cleaned out our scrap bin in the photo studio.
Right.
And there was like 2 or 3 cabriole legs in there. And I'm just picturing Chris putting cabriole legs in his wood-burning stove at home. Like, that's the most Chris Fitch thing ever. Is just burn the mahogany cabriole legs.
Yep.
Which...
nothing heats a house like mahogany.
I know, right? But, you know, I feel like I've kind of taken this a step further. Again, I'm trying not to hoard scrap, and I try just to purge it. It's been a conscious effort recently. But with the sawmill, I hoard logs, kind of. It's like, you know, I've gotten logs from people that are just too big for my sawmill, but it's like, God, that's a really nice pin oak, or that soft maple has some really nice crotches on it. It's like, it make beautiful turning blanks. But literally over the last 5 or 6 days, I've had a little mini stand-on skid steer from one of my arborist buddies. So after work every day, I have been filling up a dump trailer full of the stuff that I'm never actually going to cut, and been hauling it off to the log dump, which in of itself is a problem, because I get to the log dump and then I see really nice logs. And it's like the most self-defeating thing in the world.
Maybe it's just purpose, though, because you're trading something you can't use for something you can.
Is accurate, because I have not gotten rid of a log that is like a good, you know, air quotes if you're watching on YouTube, good saw log, because there is a very particular... I started off just taking whatever I could get, but now as my cutting journey's kind of evolved, I'm starting to get a little more particular on what logs I'll keep and what logs I'll mess around with, just from a sheer time standpoint.
Right.
I mean, you're right, because it's like I chopped up a walnut log that was pretty. I mean, it had been on the ground for like 9 years. Like, I cut through the center of it, thinking I probably should just turn this into bowl blanks, but then I saw the cracks from the outside went really close to the pith, and I'm like, it's not worth it. So I was, you know, taking some of that stuff, some of the stuff that's a little bit too big. I had a sycamore that was just a little bit too big. I had some random, like, big sections of offcuts of logs. Like, you know, if I trim a log 3 or 4 feet, it's like, I can turn that into some bowl blanks, and instead it just gets pushed into a big pile on the side of my yard and sits there. So it's like, nope, just get rid of it. But
so unless you're going to burn it or something.
And I think you have a valid point where if I'm hauling stuff off, it's okay to bring saw logs back that will fit on the mill.
Right.
So there was in particular, there was a couple cherry that looked really nice, but they're in a big pile. I would need to bring the mini skid steer out there to pick them up to put them in the trailer. So it's like, you know what? I have enough logs, I have enough offcuts. Just purge the offcuts. Which, to continue this, what do you have in your shop for lumber storage? Because that always seems to be kind of a hot topic, because it's a pain in the butt to store a lot of wood.
Right. The very last issue of ShopNotes magazine was it the very last? One of the last issues of ShopNotes had what we called the ultimate lumber rack. And it was a Chris Fitch, one of his pinnacles of design, because it's a horizontal lumber storage unit. But then in between, you know, because there's the arms that support the beams, he had platforms on it so you could, you know, you didn't have to like try and span 2 little arms or whatever. But he put drawers and cubbies in between those. So the lower section is a little deeper and have drawers. The upper ones, which are shallower, just have open cubbies. So you can put long boards all the way across. It's 8 feet wide. I mean, nothing saying that you can't make it even bigger. But the cubbies are perfect for little shorty things that you can just kind of stick in there.
It was ShopNotes 138, which would be the last issue of ShopNotes. And it was designed to have like a miter saw in the center of it, right? Okay.
Right, yeah. So you could have use it for your crosscut station or whatever for breaking down boards or whatever. I have outfitted that like it's it's lumber storage plus like a workshop hutch a little bit, because I keep some tools on the bottom shelves. I have my hand miter box on there as a little station for that. And then, the drawers I can put hardware odds and ends, and I think one of them is my router bit storage right now and that kind of thing. So it works really well. It also forces me to organize the offcuts a little bit, in the sense that, it's like if I'm sticking it in there, like, do I really want to keep this? It also works as kind of I don't know. It's like when you're fishing and you have those gauges where it's like, is this a fish that I'm allowed to keep, or does it have to go back? So it's like if it sticks in there in a certain direction, it's like that's the gauge, it's big enough to keep. If it's too small, this should probably
you
just
have a
go
slot
in the
limit
campfire
on your
pile.
scraps. Fair enough.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think that's a great practice to say.
Yeah.
Most, just pulling something out of my head here, most rails are 18 inches, so anything under 18 inches is not worth keeping. Something like that,
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing is that with it being individual cubbies, it's not just a black hole of junk.
Everything's right there.
So I can, and I can put like, one of them I have is, white oak pieces. I have another one that's a little bit larger that I keep basswood parts for carving. Another one has, the smaller plywood pieces, like you were saying. Like when you're looking for that, I just need a piece of 3/8 inch Baltic birch plywood for cleat, stop block, whatever. Yeah. So those are all in another one, and kind of organizes it. And then it's like, I only have one of these, so there's really no point in having just one random 2-inch by 3/4 by 14-inch piece of mahogany.
Yeah.
See,
like, and I've went through a bunch of different iterations of lumber storage. I like the horizontal storage, but what I have found in my shop and the way I work, the board I always want is always on the bottom of the stack. So it's like, this is stupid. So, and most of the time I've done that lumber storage, I go to like Menards or Lowe's and buy like the gorilla racking, like the, it's the perforated steel strips you bolt or leg bolt onto the wall. And then there's big brackets, and they support, they say up to 500 pounds per bracket or whatever. And I've done those, and I have one set of that in my shop that has stuff on it. But you're right. The problem is you have to span those gaps. So it's like I find myself putting long, like 2 foot wide by 8 foot long pieces of plywood that are offcuts down as a base, and then stacking stuff on top.
Sure.
And I have one of those in my garage still. That's pretty much empty. It just needs to come down. I just haven't got back there to dig it out. And I also have a lumber cart. Now everybody's going to say, Logan, you said you're not a hoarder. You sound like a hoarder, which yes, I am. I also have a lumber cart that was that one I bought, Phil, was that a Woodsmith project, I think? The big one with the,
Yes. The big 7-inch caster.
So John and I went rounds on this thing. He kept running me up when we were buying this through a company, intercompany auction. But I was like, oh, this is great. I can put this in my back utility room and store my stuff on it. I think in practice, if you had a big shop, it would work really well. It doesn't work in my shop, and I found myself I kept moving it around. So right now it's in my garage. It has lumber on it. It actually has a lot of turning blanks on it, which are another storage nightmare in itself, is turning blanks. But I think I might get rid of that lumber rack. My father-in-law has already called dibs on it, because he does have a shop. Actually, my dad called dibs on it. But anyways, I've went to, and I sent you guys a picture of this a couple of weeks ago when I changed it. In the shop here at the office, we have vertical lumber storage. So everything stands up against the wall, and it's divided by some black pipe flanges with black pipe stubs sticking out of it. So stuff can't tip left and right. And then we had chains across the front at one point. I think we took those off. But I really like that because you can compact a lot of lumber into a small area. And the way my garage is set up, I have about 2 feet on the right-hand side of one of my stalls that is, I mean, it's blank. It's empty space, basically. You know, once you pull your car in, you have basically from the trunk, from the back doors to the garage door, so it's probably 7 feet. That is, I mean, it's unused space. So I put some of those, and I'll get a picture on the show notes page. I put some of those in there and put some of my walnut that's finished drying in it. And I really like that storage solution. Everything's standing vertical. I got a lot of material into a little space. So I might kind of run with that, especially as I get some of this lumber dry and ready to sell. I think that will be an easier way to do it. Yeah. To stand it up.
I can see that.
Versus stacking it.
How tall are the ceilings in there?
The ceiling, I have a 14-foot ladder, and it won't reach the ceiling.
Oh, okay. So you have,
I probably have
pretty tall space then.
Yeah, I probably have a 16-foot tall garage, just the way our walkout is and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have plenty of room. The biggest problem is I had a couple big slabs stood up against the wall right there, and the only thing I hit is the garage door track, which is a really pain in the butt when you have a big 30-inch wide elm slab and you're trying to stand it up and it's 12 foot long and you have to lift it and shove it up against the wall. So, but yeah.
No, that's a good idea. I had my first shop in our first house was in the basement, and I had lumber storage issues down there, and several boards I had as kind of vertical storage, but they were poplar pieces for drawers for a dresser that took me a while to finish. And the issue that I had is that they had been stored so long, and I don't know if it was because it was downstairs or just smaller pieces, but they developed a long bow in them just from gravity, and I didn't really, they weren't very vertical, because the boards were so long, so they were kind of leaned a little, and so that was kind of put me off of doing vertical storage. And I don't know if what I needed to do instead was to have some kind of a ramp on the backside to kind of support it. Yeah. Or it just needs to be as vertical as possible.
And that's what I was afraid of that. So that's what I did. I went as vertical as I possibly could.
Yeah.
Without stuff tipping over.
Yeah.
So, and there is so one of my buddies that's an arborist, he's from Siberia, and he told me, he's like, oh, in my country, when we cut lumber and stack it, we stand it on end, which they do. That's a common thing in other parts of the world. To after you cut lumber to dry it, you stack it basically in a teepee like shape.
Yeah, and I've seen that where they almost have like a ridge pole and then kind of cross it.
Exactly.
Back and forth. And I don't remember, there's a word for it or a name for it, and I just can't remember what it is. But
I'm not sure. But, I mean, they obviously do that without it sagging. I don't know if that's because it's on edge, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of interesting. But, yeah, that was a fear of mine, is that I would develop a little bit of a sagger bow over time. So, trying to combat that by keeping them as vertical as possible. I think you're right. If you did a back plate that's angled, that would help. So
I think what's interesting about it is because we always think lumber storage, so you have this generic idea that it's always boards, and it's not. Mm-hmm. Like you said, turning blanks. Those are not going to stack horizontally on a shelf.
No.
You can maybe have the rounds that you kind of stack up like donuts or something like that. But
well, and I've seen one of my buddies here in town, Greg. He does a lot of pens, lots of pens, and he has a stack full of his pen blanks, and they're just a smattering of colors, and it's just the end of each one of them.
Oh, so. Yeah. Yeah, because there's about the only thing that I'm missing is having a good way to store pieces of plywood. I don't use it a ton, but when you have it, then you end up with plywood offcuts that are of a usable size, but it's like, I don't know where to go with that.
I know, and that was the biggest thing about the cart when I got it. It was like, oh, this is great for sheet goods, because it will actually hold a 4x8 sheet of plywood. And,
yeah.
Like, oh, this is great for sheet goods. In practice, it doesn't work terribly well for what I need it to, but you're right. Like, usually plywood, I try to keep stuff that's 8 inches or bigger in at least one dimension, or I take that back, in 2 dimensions. So, I figure an 8-inch by 8-inch square plywood, I can usually get a template or a pattern or something out of that, or a jig part. But I always seem to end up with these offcuts that are like, I don't know, a foot wide by 8 foot long. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
Do I just bite the bullet and rip it in half, or cut it in half, so I get, a 1 foot by 4 foot piece?
Yeah, and then you're like, now I've just limited what I can do with this.
I know, but then I don't have to store that stupid long 8 foot piece. So it's just, man. I think
it's never ending.
I think the solution is just to buy a lumberyard, and then I don't have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
So
it's easy for me to see how some people end up with like a lumber woodshed.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's just, if there's a way you can keep even that from turning into a giant bonfire waiting to happen, and organized or whatever. But, like you said earlier, with your logs, becoming more selective on what you decide to keep, and even saw, like what's even worth sawing.
Yeah.
Because I've noticed that in myself, that I've, when I first started here, there is like a plethora of delightful scrap pieces that you could use that get just casually thrown away, and you're like, why are we throwing this out? This is perfectly good wood, and I kept all sorts of stuff and still do, but I've noticed that even now it's like I just don't keep as much as I used to, and it's just not worth it. Other than, sometimes I have to keep it just to keep up my reputation as being super thrifty.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So I'll take it home so people see that, and then I'll chuck it.
No, I guess to me there's a part of me that keeps scrap wood because I don't want to buy it again, right? I mean, now I don't necessarily buy lumber, but I occasionally do still. But I don't. It's a cost savings thing. It's like, oh, that scrap's useful for something. I don't have to then buy, 3 board feet to get that piece out. But I also put a pretty hefty weight on, to me, there's a cost of holding on to lumber. Like storage space, my mental capacity on seeing all the clutter around and stuff, and the time that it's going to take me to dig through that scrap pile to find what I need, or to unstack it to get to that bottom board. And for myself, I have decided that it's just not worth it.
Yeah. Well, and plus every time, you said mental capacity, because there's also a feeling like you have to do something with that piece. Yeah. It's not like it's just sitting there for the opportunity to come along. No, it's constantly poking at you like, what are you going to do with this one? What are you going to do with this one? What are you going to do with this one?
Well, it's like I always see that meme go around on Facebook that it's like, in today's headline, man used a 2x4 that he stored in 1978 that he said he might use one day. Today is that day. It's like, there's a reason that stigma exists because we all do that. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's, I don't know. I will say this last camping trip we had, when I went through and did my I did a big purge. It was actually over Memorial Day weekend, so it was a longer camping trip, and all of the offcuts I had. I mean, I had kind of the standard mixed bag of cherry and maple and stuff, scraps. But a lot of the big pieces I had were rough cut stuff from stuff that I had sawn or broken down or whatever. And a lot of the pieces, I hate to say it, were like the crotch sections of a walnut board. It's like if you cut a walnut log that has a crotch on it, the crotch is going to be on one end. So it's like that last 2 foot is where you get all that figure and feathering and stuff. But when I'm building, say I'm building a shaker dresser or nightstand or whatever, you don't really want to mix that in. Aesthetically, I don't want to mix that in. I want nice, clean, straight grain, unless the whole thing's going to be, ungodly and flamboyant and stuff. I want it to be subtle, nice grain. So, but I always keep that little 1 or 2 foot section of the end of the board that has all the figure in it. I'm like, this is great for a saw handle like you did with the walnut crotch, or this would be a really good lid for a box, or somewhere you want to use it to highlight the grain, and it burns really nice. Because it's just I never used it. It's like if I've had it for 2 years and never used it, I'm never going to.
It's not happening. Yeah. And it's funny because at least for me, I feel like I get to before I start, it's like I just I'd like to keep all this stuff because I'm going to use it, and then you start sorting it out and throwing it into a pile to get burned or whatever, and then at some point you just flip over and it's just like, what else can I get rid of? Because you see a section of your shop get cleaner or a little bit more organized, and it's like it's all going. Everything must get burned.
Been there, done that. I mean, it didn't burn my tools, but I know exactly what you mean. It's a cascade effect.
Yeah. It's like you just kind of got to get over the hump, and then it's freeing, and then you feel way better.
I just have this great mental picture of our listeners sitting here listening to us talk for 30 minutes about getting rid of scraps in our shop. Because we've gotten so many notes from people saying, hey, I love the podcast, but, my spouse walked through and said, are you really listening to 3 idiots talk about woodworking? What are you guys talking about? Sandpaper? And then we talk about sandpaper for 30 minutes.
No, scrap wood.
Yeah, that stuff you haze me about keeping. But.
Right. I know, because my dad, who's a woodworker, he and I kind of have a little running gag of, taking a picture of something that we've saved for way too long and using it. Yep. See? Never throw anything away.
I know.
Which gets us into the whole coffee can of hardware thing, which is a totally different podcast topic. So, anyway, it was just kind of something that I thought of as when you had said that you were, because I think you even had sent a text about how full the scrap bin was in the shop.
So I had thought, here's where that whole thing stemmed from. Like I said, we were going on this camping trip. I didn't know if I had enough scrap wood at home to make it through the weekend. Because I was thinking, I've been doing good over the last couple of years of trying to pare it down. I did have enough, but I texted everybody. It was like, hey, does anybody know how full the shop scrap bin is? Because it might get raided and pillaged this weekend. But I had enough. So, but I guess, burning wood for fuel, for campfire, house heat, whatever, it's as a legitimate use as building something with it. And that's right. That's what I hate. I hate's a strong word. That's what kind of rubs me the wrong way when I go out to cut a log for somebody, and they're like, "Oh, I got these branches I want you to cut too," and I'm like, "Okay, here's the deal. They're not going to make great lumber because there's a lot of tension built up in the woods. The fibers are stretched on one side, compressed on the other. It's never going to stay flat. It's going to bind. It's like, it's better off, put it on the curb and post it for free firewood. They're like, oh, I don't want to see it burn. It's like, well, somebody's heating their house doing that. I mean, we're far enough north that people do burn burn wood for heat in the winter. I mean, we're far enough that it's legit. You get further north, like in Wisconsin, where Phil's from, there's a lot of people that do that. And it's as legitimate use of the natural resource as making boards and making furniture. So it just, that was my small tangent for this podcast, because it's turn it into firewood. It's great use for it. Don't send it to the landfill. That's a waste.
Oh. Right. Yeah. I think that's probably the part that just, what irked me when I, was seeing wood that just gets dumped in the dumpster, which we used to do here a lot. Whereas now we keep a couple of rolling garbage cans that are just for scrap. And we have a few people that have fireplaces, or like Chris, who heats his house in winter with a wood stove or outdoor furnace or whatever they call it.
I have, when we built our house, I plumbed my house for an outside wood boiler. And it's just where we're at, our winters aren't long enough or cold enough to really give me a good return on it until I put up an outside building and heat multiple buildings with it. You get, I've heard people say, oh, never burn, not necessarily scrap material like we have, but it is a legitimate concern. Some of it burns too hot to put in those. Like I've heard people say, I made the mistake one year of going to the cabinet shop and getting a bunch of offcuts, and I loaded up my wood boiler with it, and all of a sudden I look out an hour later and the thing's glowing cherry red because it's so hot, because there's so much surface area. It goes crazy. So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear if any of our listeners like heat their houses with wood, from their shop or not, because I know I have a lot of friends that do, and everybody I've ever talked to that heats with wood, their thing always is, I'll never go back. There's no heat like wood heat. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So, good use for your scraps too.
Yeah. No, it's
except for
right.
Plywood scraps. Don't do plywood scraps. A lot of glue in there.
I think it depends on what you have, right? Like if one of those outdoor boilers, probably. I think you can get away with. Whereas, you wouldn't want to burn it in a fireplace
glue,
where you're going to end up
smoke.
with more creosote and whatever building up. So, but no, it's pretty cool. I've always thought it would be fun to have a wood stove in my shop to keep it warm in winter. We had an old one in the attic of my parents' house that I always thought would be kind of cool to have, but I know that it would make my insurance company super itchy if I put that in my garage. So,
I guess I have a problem with that because, I get it. Like, it just, you're talking about like a cast iron wood stove, right? Like, I guess I kind of get that, but they don't really have problems if you put a wood furnace in. So, I don't know. Maybe it's just because they're more modern. They have digital dampeners in there and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. And I think it's just one of those things where it's just, they run the numbers on it and there's a higher risk for it.
It does paint a beautiful picture. Old man Huber out in his shop with a wood fire going with his pot of hide glue warming up on top of it.
Right.
Coffee kettle next to it boiling. Oh, man.
Little percolator
coffee
thing.
I feel like I'm writing a Christmas story right now.
Yeah. And the building right next door to us had the
Yep.
carriage house in the back. And then that back room where we had set it up as kind of like an old-timey shop, we had it right in the middle of it was a big pot-bellied wood stove. And it was
Becky's dad bought that at a freaking song and a dance. I mean, he bought it for nothing.
Right.
If I would have had a room for it, oh man. Or if I would have had a place for it. So.
Yeah. So maybe someday when I have a standalone shop building, that I could have a wood stove in there, because I think it would be super cool.
Sure. So
it wouldn't have to be a huge one.
No.
Just a kind of a vintage model, which a lot of those were double walled and pretty safe. And
so let me ask you this: when you say a standalone shop, what would you consider the smallest shop that you would move into and consider your shop? Because right now you're in the back third of a garage, basically.
The garage at my house was built by a guy who I think had a shop or some kind of a workroom back there, whether he was a woodworker or just a general tinkerer kind of person. So the garage was built like an extra 8 feet deep across the whole width of it. So it's a 2-car garage door with an entry door to the side of it. So that's what I think I measured. It's like 26 feet wide.
Sounds about right.
And like 24 feet deep or something like that. So my shop is basically 8 feet deep and 24 feet wide.
Okay.
So it's a narrow space, but I get to keep all of my stuff set up all the time. I don't have to back cars out to do anything unless I'm working on something gargantuan. Like I helped a friend build a triple-decker bunk bed once, and I mean, clearly we had to back one of the cars out for that. Yep. But
so right now you're in 192 square feet. That's what your shop is. So which would be a 16 by 12?
16 by 12. I could probably do 16 by 12. I think if I really wanted to, and that's the other thing too, is because I see a lot of people, I mean, who doesn't flip through Fine Woodworking's tools and shops issue?
Yep.
Or to be like kids today and look at all the content creators on YouTube who are building I've decided to build this 84 by 127 little workshop.
Yeah.
And I can have one section that's metalworking and one section that's woodworking and one section that's diesel mechanics and another section that's
I think you just hit every content creator in those different segments. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Well done.
In your face.
Well done.
And I don't begrudge them anything, but I think there's a slight disservice when we hold that up as the dream shop.
Yeah, or you're saying, hey, I'm showing you how to build XYZ, and I'm going to cut the parts on my big Powermatic CNC. And it's
right.
I mean, I get it. Good for you. You got it. You have it.
Yeah.
But it's still one of those things not everybody has.
Yeah, not everybody has that space. So, but I think of somebody like Curtis Buchanan, the chairmaker. Now, I know he just does chairs, but he's got a pretty small space as an outbuilding. And I don't think, other than his lathe and maybe a bandsaw, I don't know that he has any power tools in it. Or like Bill Carter making planes in the UK. And he's got essentially a little potting shed.
Yep.
That's his shop. And he's, as the weather warrants, he's outside as often as he is inside.
Yep.
So I think I could probably do 12 by 12 and make it work.
Okay. Which would be slightly smaller than what you have right now.
Right.
Okay.
But it would all depend on, I wouldn't want to do it in a 12 by 12 garden shed kit from Menards.
Okay.
Because the roof is going to be too small. There's
Sure.
going to be almost no light, that kind of thing. So it would have to depend on that. There's a guy, Peter Follensby. I don't know if you've ever seen. He does mostly hand tool woodworking, but he built basically like a timber frame building in his backyard. That's not super big. I think could work. Jim Tolpin on the Instagrams. I don't know if anybody's ever seen his shop. He's got a shed. Again, he does mostly hand tool stuff, but I like his size of a shop, which is probably in the like 12 by 16
Sure.
kind of neighborhood. And I have a few power tools that I would not want to give up. I like my bandsaw, my drill press, and my thickness planer.
Sure. But those could be moved around in a 12 by 12.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm trying to
And I
decide how big my
found that
office is in here. Probably 10 by 10.
even in my shop, I found that I just rearrange the shop to suit what I'm working on anyway. So,
Sure.
When I need to plane stuff, I pull the planer out into the middle kind of because I have like a narrow kind of center walkway on one side of it, and I can plane boards however size I want. And if I had decent access to outside, there'd be plenty of times where it would be fun to just be able to wheel stuff out, onto the front lawn of the shop or whatever.
See,
I've pulled my thickness planer out onto the driveway a couple of times because I have it on a cart. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to do that with the bandsaw or something like that, just because it's that much longer of a trip and there's really no point to it.
yeah.
But,
See, I was thinking one of those. They're like a shed kit, but they're not. They're like the next size up and the next style up, where they're more so like, cabin kits basically, where they have like a porch on them and stuff, but they're like they're like 12 or 14 by 16. Like I think I could do one of those. And the roofs, the ceilings can get a little taller in those. I mean, I think quite honestly, if I didn't have a need to do some of the popular woodworking stuff in my shop and stuff, and I was just going to go to a turning only, I think that'd be perfect. I'd have a bandsaw, I would have a lathe, and I'd have an overhead door and a leaf blower, and that would be it. And it would just be just open the door, blow it all out. I mean, and that's basically there's a guy, he used to have a show on, I think, PBS, that was underwritten by Popular Woodworking. Now he has a show on YouTube, and his name's Tim Yoder, and that's basically what he's working on. Now, it's a little bit bigger than that, and it looks like it's like a garage that he built in his backyard for his turning, but it's fairly small. And that's what he has. I mean, he has his American Beauty lathe. He has a bandsaw. He might have a drill press in there. I don't recall, but then a couple counters, and that's it. And it's funny because he'll occasionally comment about it as he's turning. He's like, "Oh, I don't know the camera guy's name." He's like, "Oh, he can't get far enough away from me because the shop's so small," and he's like throwing wet shavings all over everything and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I could do that. I could go to like a 12 by 12 for a turning shop. And part of this question was stemmed from an article that you just wrote for Woodsmith that went to the printer yesterday or today or something, on setting up a carving space. I was like, yeah, that's kind of, for a turning space, I could do that completely.
Yeah. And I'd like to, I did that article, and I'd like to do it as a series. Not that I have to write all of them, but a popular topic in woodworking is setting up shop. And most of the articles, books, whatever, about setting up shop end up defaulting to some version of a semi-pro cabinet / furniture making shop, which I think suits the idea of like what you would consider as a quote unquote typical woodsmith, popular woodworking, fine woodworking
audience.
Woodworker's Journal kind of projects that we show. But I think that there are as many, if not more, branches of woodworking that don't need to have a table saw the size of the Nimitz in the middle of the shop, and does a disservice, I think, to what it means to be a woodworker.
I would agree with that, because and it's comments we get a lot from our listeners and viewers and subscribers and stuff. It's like, hey, I don't have that room. Can't you show me a small space that works? So.
And there was a meme that went around a few years ago that it was Don on the set of the show, and it was and the caption on the image was like, yeah, I can build that really easily if I have $25,000 worth of equipment.
Yeah.
And it's like, I see what you're getting at there, but it wasn't $25,000 worth of equipment. But that being said, that's why I wanted to do the carving thing, is because you don't need a big space for carving. Or like you were just talking about, is kind of like your ultimate
turning shop.
Yeah. And I would think that would be a super cool article. Is like, hey, I'm interested in turning. And then granted, you can all of a sudden get into choose your own adventure on what's a turning shop, because it's like pen turning, bowls, spindles,
exactly.
Whatever. But if you were to just do a turning shop, I think you had talked about once, like, one of the revolutionary new tools for turners were electric chainsaws.
Yeah.
Totally blew my mind. I just didn't even think about it. It's like, oh yeah. Because you could be in the basement, say, and
chainsawing a bowl blank.
And you make a bowl blank, and all you need is essentially a stump and your chainsaw, and you don't have to worry about gas fumes and carbon monoxide warnings. And
now they'll still spray oil all over, but that's your own battle fight.
Right. But even then, if you're turning green wood, you're already investing in shop cleanup. Let's be honest.
So you said you want to make this a series. Can I put in a request for our audience, on our audience's behalf, for your next one? Setting up an Intarsia shop.
First, you're going to need a bunch of balloon animals to use as models.
No offense to all the Intarsia artists in the world.
Right. Yeah. It's just, as everybody who listens knows or would choose to admit, it's really easy to make fun of something that you're not interested in.
Yes, completely.
And very personal if someone makes fun of something you are. So I do that tongue in cheek. And it's not, it's just not an area of woodworking that I want to take part in. Too many of them. So anyway, but yeah, that's what I would love to continue that as a setting up shop series. Because I've thought of one as, like the turning shop, carving shop, like a DIY shop. If you were doing mostly home improvement kind of projects, what would be some essential tools? And I think each one of them would have kind of a core set of tools, like decent measuring and layout tools, that are going to kind of fit no matter what you're doing for the most part. And like a battery drill driver and something like that. But
so speaking of carving, do you have your item you've been working on next to you?
No, I don't. I have it at home, but I will put a photo of it on the show notes page.
So I thought it turned out super cool.
So I'm admittedly a little off in the sense that for Father's Day this year, I decided to make my wife and kids a gift for Father's Day.
Like, here's how awesome I am in your face. You don't appreciate
me,
is what that says.
That's exactly what I was trying to go for. It's something I've been thinking about for a few years now that I just felt like I just wanted to do. Like
that's fair.
So I made, my daughter is been into flower pressing recently, which is fine because she's got 89,000 books in her room. and so she's been using books to press flowers. But I got a bunch of veneer press screws from Brian Nelson. I think I maybe brought this up in another podcast. And I made a little flower press for her. And I have these little 6x6 squares of MDF. I think there's 5 of them. So she could have like 6 layers of flowers pressed in there. Because you don't need a ton of pressure on it. And then for my son, who he's kind of becoming a little bit more independent and wants his room to be a little more like his own space, and we are constantly getting on him about, he's like a lot of kids these days, into hoodie sweatshirts, and they're all over the house. It's like, where's your sweatshirt? Well, there's one, and there's one over here, and there's one over there. So I made a wall-mounted coat rack for him to hang up his sweatshirts on. And then for my wife, I did because I'm a Dave Fisher fanboy, I made a little bird bowl for my wife, just have as kind of a desk art for her command center for the house.
Which it turned out fantastic. That's why I brought it up, because it turned out super cool.
Yeah, and it was, I've been doing bowls off and on for a few years now, and this one actually turned out the best out of all of them, which is funny because the wood was comparatively green. It was basswood that you sawed last year.
Yep.
But it was in a board, and I ended up taking a section of it and gluing it up into a blank instead of going the whole green wood, find a branch that's got a crook in it, split it with a fro, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
I take a hybrid approach on how I create those. And so I did that, and yeah, I don't mind saying that I'm really happy with it because I took another step in my development there. So that was kind of fun. So I will put photos of all of those for all the people who are watching on the YouTubes and listening on the radio. I will put photos of that on the show notes page at woodsmith.com/podcasts. So it was a fun project to do. A shout out to you, Logan, because I've been for both the flower press and the coat rack, I used a bunch of that white fur.
Oh, nice. Cool.
That I'm building my workbench off of. I had a bunch of offcuts. And it's one of those things where it's like there's that saying, for if all you have is a hammer, then everything is a nail. It's like if all you have is white fur, then all your projects are white fur.
That's right.
However, it's super fun to work with because on all 3 of those, except for just a few steps, I did as much as I could by hand on it. And
white fur's cheating by hand.
Right. It totally is. Because I did the uprights for the flower press, I dovetailed into the base, and I did hand-cut dovetails on there, and hand-cut dados for the shelf on the coat rack, used my brace and bit for the pegs that hold the sweatshirts and all that kind of stuff. And I even resawed a couple of pieces by hand with my rip saw, which it was just tons of fun. I had a blast doing all of that by hand. I don't know that I would do all of my woodworking that way, but but I think what's nice about it is using the white fir because it's well behaved. There's not a lot of difference between early and late wood, like if I were using yellow pine or something. So everything behaved pretty well. So I was able to focus on the form of the skills rather than fighting the material.
Yep.
So that when I, if I wanted to do something like, we were talking about this the other day, like your tool chest has hand-cut dovetails in it in soft maple. And I'm doing hand-cut dovetails in my drawers in white fir. And we both loved the experience.
Yep.
And, having done it in white fir, I know that I could try it in something harder and feel a lot more confident in doing it.
Well, and I think that's why it's funny because I asked my buddy Jimmy Clues ordered a bunch of turning blanks for me that are currently in a kiln out in Adel, west of Des Moines. And I asked him, I said, hey, it was like, do you want me to include any basswood in this? Because I got a bunch. He's like, no. He's like, it turns beautifully. It's a great material to turn on, but he likes people to walk away with a good-looking piece. Because basswood can get a little plain. But
Yeah.
there's some merit to it. Like working with an easy to work with wood to develop skill is completely legit. Like,
Yeah.
I told you, Phil, when you were saying it, that making that bird bowl was like scooping ice cream because it's so soft. I'm like, I know when I was doing the Easter eggs out of it, it's like, oh my God, everybody should learn to turn with basswood. Like even being, I would call it 70% dry. Like it's not sopping wet, but it's not finished yet.
Right.
But I mean, just like ribbons. It's almost like you're turning resin. Just ribbons are flying off. It's awesome. Oh.
Yeah, and there's just something about, because we've done some projects recently with basswood in the shop.
Yeah.
And it's kiln dried basswood that who knows how long it was sitting there. And it's just dry, and it's got that kind of, I don't know, how did you and Chris talk about it one time, where it just feels crumbly
and that's what I've noticed, because
styrofoamy or something like that.
I've noticed that with I did a carving class with Al Breed, and almost everything we did was basswood. Obviously, basswood's a great carving wood. That's kind of what we're talking about. But yeah, kiln dried basswood, it gets crunchy. Like if your tools are not perfectly sharp, it can crunch and leave fuzzies. Where if with that little bit of moisture, like you get clean, shiny cuts off of it, which is just awesome.
Oh yeah, which is what I was getting, and it was just so much fun to work with. And I feel like the same way with that fur, because even that you cut last August, so it's not even been a year, and that was almost inch and a half, like inch and a quarter, plus, boards. Totally dry enough to use.
Yep.
But still had, I don't know, a little bit of life in them that it cuts really smooth. It planes really nicely.
And I'm telling you, it's just the air dried stock. It drives me nuts when people say, it has to be kiln dried to use for furniture. Bull, because they didn't have kilns 300 years ago, and that's some of the most in demand, highest priced furniture right now. It still is around. Yeah. So just you throw stuff in a kiln, it dries out the lignin in the wood, and if you can keep that lignin soft, whether it's air dried or leaving the moisture content a little higher, it just is a different experience. It's like it's like driving your grandma's broke down Pinto or driving a brand new Corvette. Different experience.
Yeah. So anyway, I've just been having a lot of fun with it, and as much fur as there is, there's a bunch of it that's left over that's not like prime furniture kind of making pieces, but there's plenty of either shop fixtures or I have a room in our basement that needs to kind of get trimmed out, and I think I might just use that white fur and trim out the room in that. And even if I end up painting it, it'll still be kind of nice to work with and do simple window casings and stuff around. So, yeah, it's a delight. I think we're going to wrap up this episode of the Shop Notes podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Like we've talked about, we have a show notes page where we try and show other resources, some of the things that we've been talking about, especially when it comes to projects or specific old projects from the magazines or plans or whatever. So if you want to head over to woodsmith.com/podcasts, you can check out all the show notes pages from previous episodes as well as this one. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to your normal podcast, or if you want to watch it on YouTube and see two heads nodding and laughing and talking to each other, feel free to do that at our YouTube channel as well. Don't forget that Shop Notes podcast is supported by the readers of Woodsmith magazine. So if you're considering getting to be a better woodworker, please consider subscribing to Woodsmith and popular woodworking magazines. And we'll see you next week on the next episode of the Shop Notes podcast. Bye everybody.
This episode of ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Plans. You'll find nearly 1,000 plans covering everything that you'd want to build. From furniture projects to gift projects, kitchen accessories, workshop projects, and jigs and more. Find your next project at woodsmithplans.com.